You're in the crush of bodies before the line breaks. You can taste iron in the air, blood, sweat, hot metal, while the ground trembles under hooves that aren't running away. Someone screams to retreat. Someone else is praying. And then you see it, a dark wedge of armored riders turning toward the killing field. Not from it. For 2 heartbeats, it looks like madness. Then it becomes something worse purpose. Visors drop, lances lower, the horses surge. And at the center of that moving wall rides a man who should not be here, fighting for a ruler who ruined him. A Christian prince charging to save a Muslim sultan. A son trying to outpace the shadow of his father's death. Before we go deeper, I'd love to know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy cinematic history like this, consider liking and subscribing. It still blows my mind how these old stories reach every corner of the world. Now we can say his name without softening it. Stefan Lazarevic, a Serbian lord forged in hostage politics, trained in the enemy's camp, praised by conquerors, cursed by allies, and remembered above all as a contradiction in armor. The title of this story sounds like a riddle, The Dragon Who Served the Sultan. And the riddle is real, because Stefan's life forces a question that won't sit still. How does a man stay honorable when the only way to keep his people alive is to serve the person who broke his family? This isn't a tale that begins with triumph. It begins with silence. A palace can be loud when it celebrates music, horses, metal, laughter. But the palace Stefan inherits is quiet in a way that feels like a warning. Courtiers move carefully. Servants look down. When doors open, it's not to reveal feasts, but messengers with pale mouths and dust on their boots. His father is dead. Not gone, not lost. Dead. Taken at a battlefield where the nobility bled out so quickly, the state felt decapitated in a single afternoon. A country that once thought it could bargain with destiny is suddenly bargaining for time, days, months, seasons, just enough to breathe. And Stefan is a boy. That detail matters because the tragedy of his genius is that it grows out of a childhood that never gets to be a childhood. He doesn't get the slow apprenticeship of a normal prince. He gets emergency power. He gets decisions too heavy for a grown man, placed on a narrow back that still belongs in a training yard, not a throne room. In stories, the boy prince swears revenge and becomes a hero. In Stefan's world, revenge is a luxury that gets nations erased, because the sharks are already circling. To the south, the Ottoman Empire expands with the steady confidence of a rising tide. To the north, Hungary watches like a wolf that understands opportunity. Inside Serbia, rival nobles taste weakness and begin sharpening their smiles into knives. Stefan's court is not united by grief, it is tested by it. And the person who sees this fastest is not Stefan. It is his mother. History often turns widows into statues, women frozen in mourning. But Stefan's mother in this story is not marble. She is steel. She does not have the luxury of collapsing, because collapse would become policy. She reads the map the way generals read battlefields, where the enemy can move, how quickly, and what will happen if you pretend honor can substitute for numbers. Serbia cannot fight 2 empires at once, so she chooses a master, not because she believes in that master, not because she forgives anything. She chooses because the alternative is annihilation, and in that choice she teaches Stefan the first brutal rule of his life. Sometimes the only way to keep your people alive is to accept a humiliation so deep it feels like betrayal. The Ottoman demand is not only tribute silver, grain, soldiers. The demand is personal. A sister, a living guarantee, a princess sent into the Sultan's orbit as collateral against rebellion. In other words, if Serbia breaks its vow, the punishment will begin with their own blood. Imagine the courtyard when she leaves. This is not a wedding. This is not an alliance celebrated with music. It is a procession that feels like a funeral where the dead is still breathing. The streets may throw flowers, but they do not throw them like confetti. They throw them like offerings. Stefan watches his sister step into an Ottoman convoy, and here the story hurts in a quiet way, because the sister does not scream, she does not collapse. She goes with a composed, dignified stillness that makes the entire scene worse, because it means she understands exactly what she is being turned into. A ransom with a heartbeat. A human shield dressed in silk. Stefan is old enough to remember her voice and young enough to still need it. And now he watches it carried away. That moment doesn't make him heroic, it makes him hollow. It carves out a space inside him where ideals used to leave. And in that hollow space, something else grows, calculation. Months later, it is Stefan's turn to pay the price. He rides to the Ottoman court to kneel before the man whose empire helped destroy his father. A young prince walking into a lion's den, hoping that obedience might be mistaken for harmlessness. He expects humiliation. He expects death. He expects the end of his line. But this is where Stefan's tragedy becomes more complex than a simple revenge story. Because the Sultan does not destroy him. The Sultan studies him, and then, like a gambler recognizing a rare card, keeps him. This is the second brutal rule of Stefan's life. Sometimes your enemy doesn't want you dead. Sometimes your enemy wants you useful. The Sultan in this story becomes not only a conqueror, but a craftsman. He sees in Stefan something that can be shaped into an instrument. A Balkan ruler who knows the terrain, commands Serbian knights, and can deliver European-style heavy cavalry. Exactly the kind of crushing force an Eastern army can use like a hammer. So instead of treating Stefan as disposable, the Sultan offers him something far more psychologically dangerous: proximity. Favor. A place close enough to power that it feels like respect. And respect from the man who killed your father is a poison that works slowly. It confuses hatred. It blurs certainty. It builds a cage you can't point to, because the bars are emotional. Obligation, gratitude, fear, and the terrible knowledge that your people's lives are now tied to your behavior. Stefan returns home changed, not soft and sharpened. He begins ruling like someone who has seen what happens when states collapse. He stabilizes what he can. He rebuilds what he can. And all the while, he knows what's coming. The call will come. War. And when the call comes, he will have to ride with the crescent against the cross, not because he believes in it, because he is bound, because his sister is a hostage, because his country is a small animal trapped between larger jaws. This is the schizophrenic duality of his early adulthood. In Serbia, he is prince. In the Ottoman sphere, he is vassal, sometimes honored guest, sometimes velvet prisoner, always watched. He trains alongside enemy soldiers. He learns their methods: speed, deception, psychological pressure. He absorbs the East and combines it with the West, and he becomes what the Sultan needs him to become: a shock trooper, a breaker of lines, a man whose cavalry can slam into exhausted enemies like a closing gate. To the Ottomans, this makes Stefan invaluable. To Europe, it makes him monstrous. And to Serbia, it makes him both savior and stain. Then Europe makes its move. A crusade forms. The great lords of the West gather their knights in polished armor, convinced that bravery is a weapon that never dulls. They speak about honor as if honor can stop arrows. They laugh at the enemy as if laughter can replace reconnaissance. Stefan watches the Crusaders like a man watching a storm form over a village that cannot evacuate in time, because he knows something they don't. The Ottoman army is not a barbarian horde. It is a system. It is discipline. It is logistics. It is strategy unburdened by aristocratic pride. And Stefan, bound by oath and hostage politics, rides against them. The battle becomes a collision of two mentalities. The Crusaders want glory. The Ottomans want results. The Crusaders charge because their culture treats caution like cowardice. The Ottomans wait because their culture treats patience like a weapon. And when the moment comes when the Crusader momentum burns itself out, Stefan's cavalry is released like a trap springing shut. You can picture it, the shift from shouting to screaming. The sudden appearance of fresh armored riders on a flank you thought was secure. The shock of realizing that the man crashing into you wears a Christian crest. It is not just defeat. It is betrayal, at least in the eyes of men who cannot imagine that survival might demand such a choice. The crusade collapses. And then the aftermath arrives, the part most heroic stories avoid. Prisoners are executed in great numbers. Men who expected ransom are slaughtered because the Sultan is enraged, because terror is policy, because the machine must keep rolling. Stefan stands close enough to see faces. This is the first major break inside him. He is brilliant in war, and yet he is helpless in the aftermath. He cannot undo the blood he helped spill. He cannot wash his hands without leaving the water red. And if he protests too strongly, Serbia will pay. So he learns to swallow horror and keep his posture. He learns what it costs to be successful. From Europe's perspective, Stefan becomes the Christian slayer. From the Ottoman perspective, he becomes the trusted blade. From Serbia's perspective, he becomes the ruler who keeps them alive by staining his own soul. He needs a way out. But the Ottoman Empire seems invincible. Then history, cruel, unpredictable, delivers an interruption so violent it reshapes the entire region. A conqueror rises from the east. A storm with a name that travels faster than armies. Stories arrive first. Cities broken, rulers humiliated, pyramids of skulls, empires trembling. Timur and the Ottomans march to meet him. Now we return to the moment you opened in, the battlefield, that feels like the end of an era without anyone having time to name it. The lines buckle. Panic spreads like fire through dry grass. Mercenaries defect mid-battle, turning blades on the hands that fed them. The Sultan is surrounded. The exit routes close. Spears form walls. The air becomes a roar of collapsing certainty. This is where most men run. Stefan does not. He gathers his elite, the armored wedge, and charges into the teeth of chaos. And here the paradox becomes unbearable. He is charging to save the Sultan, the same empire that executed his father, the same court that took his sister, the same master who has forced him to kill men who share his faith. Why? Because Stefan's loyalty is not to the Sultan. It is to Serbia's continued existence. If the Sultan dies here in this chaos, Serbia does not automatically become free. Serbia becomes exposed. A small, battered country with enemies on every border, and no shield left between it and retaliation. So Stefan rides into the storm to control the only variable he can. He cuts a corridor through the encirclement, metal on metal, horses slipping on mud that isn't just mud, men falling, crushed under hooves. The wedge drives forward like a ship's prow, and for a few minutes the laws of fear seem to bend around it. Stefan reaches the Sultan. He begs him to move. He offers his horse. He offers his life. But the Sultan refuses pride, shock, paralysis, some fatal internal lock. The ruler who has terrified Europe is suddenly a man stuck inside himself. Stefan cannot carry him out like cargo. So he does what the world has trained him to do. Finish the duty even if the duty is pointless. He turns back. He covers the retreat of the Sultan's heir. He fights his way out of the collapsing battlefield. He survives? The Sultan does not, at least not as a ruler. He is captured. The Ottoman machine fractures. Sons fight sons. Provinces rebel. The empire bleeds into civil war. And Stefan, riding away from that disaster, feels something he has not felt since childhood. Breathing room, not peace, just space. The leash slackens. The master who held the keys to Stefan's life is now a prisoner. The empire that loomed over Serbia like a permanent eclipse is suddenly cracked open, chaotic, distracted. This is the moment Stefan becomes something else. Not merely a vassal, not merely a weapon, a free agent. But freedom is not only opportunity. Freedom is responsibility without a shield. Stefan doesn't simply gallop home and declare independence like a fairy tale. He moves like a strategist who understands that survival requires legitimacy, alliances, and symbolism. He rides to Constantinople, to the ancient capital that still carries spiritual authority, even as it weakens physically. And here, politics performs one of its favorite tricks. It forgets old sins when new threats appear. The Byzantines, once strangled by Ottoman pressure, now see Stefan differently. The enemy of their enemy becomes a potential ally. The prince who served the Turks becomes a useful Christian bulwark. In a ceremonial moment heavy with meaning, Stefan receives honor and recognition that elevates him in the hierarchy of rulers. It is not merely a title, it is a public rewriting of his identity. He entered this wider world as a mercenary vassal. He leaves it as a recognized sovereign. But the road home is still dangerous. Broken Ottoman units roam like wolves. Bandits live off collapse. Stefan fights his way back through a landscape where order has melted. And when he reaches Serbia, he does not find celebration. He finds fear, rumors, uncertainty, a people who have been trained by decades of pressure to expect the worst. Stefan arrives not with panic, but with a plan. He looks north, to Hungary, to the same king whose crusade he helped crush, the same neighbor who once threatened Serbia's borders, and he begins to negotiate. This is the third brutal rule of Stefan's life. In a world of empires, yesterday's enemy can become tomorrow's insurance. Hungary doesn't ally with Stefan out of forgiveness. Hungary allies with Stefan because Hungary is pragmatic, because Hungary wants a buffer, because Hungary knows from painful experience that Stefan is the best soldier in the region, and Stefan does not ally with Hungary out of piety. He allies because he needs a counterweight to the Ottomans, because he knows the Ottoman civil war will end, and when it ends, the machine will turn west again. This alliance culminates in something that feels almost mythic, a chivalric order, an elite brotherhood meant to defend Christendom, built as much on symbolism as on steel. The Order of the Dragon, a dragon with a cross and emblem that says, in one image, what Stefan's life has been saying in blood: you can be monstrous and protective at the same time. You can be feared and necessary. You can be a guardian that has learned to speak the language of monsters. Stefan is honored, elevated, welcomed into European prestige, and then he is given a gift that becomes his masterpiece. Belgrade. At the time, it's a neglected fortress, a border town, a place that feels like a throat waiting to be cut. Stefan sees something else. He sees geometry. He sees rivers meeting like veins. He sees a shield for Europe and a heart for Serbia. So he builds. He pours wealth, silver, taxes, every ounce of state capacity into stone. Walls become layered. Towers rise. A port deepens. Trade routes revive. Institutions appear. Hospitals, libraries, courts. Belgrade transforms from ruin into statement. For a brief, shining moment, Serbia is not merely surviving. It is thriving. Stefan holds court like a Western monarch. Knights travel to test themselves against him. Scholars gather. The ruler who once rode as a hostage now plays the game of kings. And if this story ended here, it would be too clean, because the enemy that rises next is not an empire. It is family. While Stefan builds Belgrade, resentment grows in the shadow of his success. A younger brother watches and feels eclipsed. Foreign agents whisper, promises are offered. Half the kingdom, an army, revenge. This is how empires conquer without marching. They turn brothers into weapons. Civil war is ugly in a way foreign invasions are not. Foreign invasions can be framed as us versus them. Civil war is intimate. It burns villages that share the same saints. It turns childhood memories into battle maps. Stefan is forced into compromises. Territories split. Oaths break. Serbia bleeds itself while its enemies watch. And then the betrayal collapses into tragedy. The brother who gambled with foreign support discovers the oldest truth in politics. Patrons do not love you. They use you until you are inconvenient. The brother is killed, executed without ceremony, disposed of like a problem. When the news reaches Stefan, it does not feel like triumph. It feels like solitude. Like something essential has been cut away. He has won. And yet the victory tastes like ash. This is the moment Stefan hardens. Power centralizes. Sentimentality dies. Not because he loves cruelty, but because he learns that softness invites collapse. Survival demands discipline. He turns to a new fortress, law and wealth. Land is consolidated. Mining is codified. Serbian silver flows into the state like blood to the heart. Armies need more than bravery. They need payroll. With that wealth, Stefan builds not just walls, but memory. He becomes a patron of culture. Monasteries rise like bunkers stone wrapped around scripture. Towers guard prayer. Inside, scribes copy, translate, and standardize texts, forging a language of memory that conquest cannot erase. Stefan writes too. A tender, intimate work filled with longing. A warrior writing softness into ink. And here lies the tragedy. You can fortify cities and outlive conquerors. You cannot negotiate with loneliness. Stefan stands between east and west, crescent and cross, too compromised for purists, too independent for masters. Then comes the dynastic threat. He has no son, no clear heir. He shocks the nobles by choosing a successor from a rival line. Old grudges must die for Serbia to live. To secure recognition, he trades Belgrade, the White City he rebuilt for protection. Political surgery that saves the state and scars the soul. He dies quietly, last command, secure the heir. Even in death, Stefan is holding Serbia together.